when Havoc struck. Brought to you by Mobil Corporation.
You know, of all the catastrophes in the world, there are none so poignant as coal mine disasters. Wives and mothers wait at the pit heads for the fateful news that they always feared would one day come. Now, the coal mining communities here in South Wales are no exception. They have seen their share of tears and grief. Today, we look at the story of a disaster which overwhelmed this valley. On October the 21st, 1966, there occurred a mining tragedy here that was unparalleled in cruelty and heartbreak. A coal waste pile collapsed. It engulfed a school. It killed 116 young children, 5 of their teachers, and 23 other people. The Children of Aberfan, South Wales, had effectively been wiped out in a matter of minutes. Since the disaster, the tip and others near it have been painstakingly removed. The mountain on which it stood has been seeded and landscaped, but the scars and the new houses replacing those lost are very evident. Aberfan is a quiet Welsh village, a close-knit community steeped in the traditions of its lifeblood, coal. Few children now think of going down the mines by choice. Their fathers still do. They always have done. But mining remains the tradition of the Welsh valleys. Indeed, the seams beneath the foundations of Aberfan created the village itself. 600 tons are still brought to the surface every day. Tips were a common scene on the South Wales landscape. Aberfan had 7, and it was the 7th that slipped on the last day of school term. The tips had overshadowed the village for 60 years. They had slipped before, but the danger signs were not heeded. GWYN Brown was on the peak of tip 7 when it collapsed in 1966. A miner all his life, the tips were crucial to men like him and to the villages themselves.
Well, the tip at that time, if you stopped the tip, you'd stop the pit. You know, it was so essential to get rid of the waste material. And this is all the valleys, I suppose. This was happening in all the valleys. Not only in this valley, in every valley, I think.
We grew up with the tips. They were a normal part of the South Wales landscape. As you went to any part of South Wales where the valleys had a mine, you would find a tip. That was a normal part of the scenery.
The normal part of the scenery that October day became a grim, swift killer. It engulfed not only a school and its young children, but 40 nearby houses, a farm, and part of another school. A water main fractured beneath the weight of the slurry, releasing 3 million gallons of water to complicate rescue work. As the children set off on that last day of term, the mine at Aberfan was working as normal. Dumping was about to commence on tip 7. These buckets are carrying waste from the mine down there to the top of the tip behind me. Now, the main tip at Aberfan was similar to this one, but unlike this tip, the one at Aberfan was built over springs and streams. So when it collapsed, thousands of tons of wet coal dust moved down into the village so quickly that the people working at the top, they didn't know what was happening at the bottom.
Of course, at that time, you didn't realize that these things are happening down here. Not at that moment. because it went into the mist. We didn't realise about this down here because there'd been a slip before, but it never done what had happened there. You know, it just went so far and stopped, which we thought it would do again.
We changed our library books on the far side of the classroom, which was near the tip. Then we went back to our seats, and he said, put away your books. So we put it away, and he started writing on the board. And that's when the lights started to flash on and off, and they started to shudder. Then it happened.
And all of a sudden we seen glass flying everywhere. So the dinner lady told us to get on the floor. So we all dived to the floor and she got on top of us. And then the next thing we knew, then there was all slurry and the walls were falling in on top of us.
There was a nurse cleaning the car where I was, so we both ran up. And when we got there, we saw what happened. And I can remember a girl coming out of the rubble. She was covered in black and bleeding a lot. And somebody said, take her home.
I got to the scene of the disaster. Everything was so quiet. And as if nature had realized that a tremendous mistake had been made. And nature was speechless.
You could hear a pin drop after it. You could hear a pin drop. There wasn't a bird singing even on the mountain. And I think it was the same down here when we got down here, like. Everything was so quiet.
I was pulling the teacher's hair, but we didn't know that she had died. She'd saved us. So it seemed like we were there for hours. And then all of a sudden then we could see light and we could see the men, and they shouted that there was some you're alive. And then they started to pull us out. And as I was by the radiator, they had to pull everybody else out first and then get me out because the teacher was on top of me.
Rescuers entered the devastated school by every means possible. Distraught parents and friends gathered as news of the disaster spread. The grim task was underway. The miners themselves, always prepared for emergencies underground, were among the first on the scene. They used their skills as they had never done before.
My father's friend, see, he said that's Jeffrey Edwards down there because he saw my fair hair. And then they started digging around me, firemen. And they chopped around the desk, which was holding me in, and then carted me out, showed me sort of in a relay to outside, where they gave me an injection and then sent me off to hospital.
29 children like Jeffrey were fortunate. The search continued for others. For fear of hurting already injured children, rubble was moved stone by stone. The mothers of Aberfan, stunned, shocked, but courageous, were there. Mrs. Jean Gough was among them.
It was a drizzling morning and very cold. I caught my hold of my coat and I ran. When I reached the base of the short hill before the school, you stood there because what you were seeing, you just couldn't grasp. You couldn't really take it in, you know. You were standing outside yourself and looking at something that occurred, and you couldn't really believe what you saw. One gets gripped by panic, and you started running, and you ran and ran and ran towards it, and there was quiet. It was so quiet, you know. You couldn't hear anything. Everything was very quiet. We rushed up the steps of the school by then, and we climbed in through a window, stood in the hall where the hall used to be, and you looked there, and there was the sky looking at you. With all the thousands of tons of stuff that was down on you, and you were standing in the middle of it, you couldn't, you realise then how small and how insignificant you are. You can't do anything. When you are faced with that sort of situation, there is absolutely nothing, not a thing you can do.
But there was plenty to do. Rescue workers from miles around came to the stricken village to help look for its children. The enormity of the task and the knowledge that time was running out became more apparent with every brick that was moved and every shovel turned. Hundreds of volunteers came to dig. The police were there, office workers, students, miners, even children helped. The task was arduous. No effort was spared. The will to dig, the flicker of hope knew no bounds. But as more and more lifeless children were found, grief struck Aberfan. Precious few slept in the village that night. The relentless task of recovery continued with the aid of powerful arc lights. It was the longest night the village had ever known. Recovery workers were near exhaustion as dawn broke. For many, the only respite was the occasional cup of tea. Some who were lucky not to lose their lives lost their homes. Meager possessions had to be salvaged. As well as the children and their teachers, 23 adults were also missing. But all hope of finding them alive faded against the impossible odds. The mechanical diggers moved in. Young David Hopkins saw his little brother and sister go to school that morning. He, too, waited for the news.
It was a couple of days before either one of them were found. When I was told my brother was dead, I cried an awful lot because we were pretty close. It was only 18 months between us. And because my father came up and told me, and he was crying when he told me, so I started crying. And then when they told me about my sister, it wasn't so bad because I expected it, more or less.
The disaster was of such grievous proportions that members of the royal family came to Aberfan. Prince Philip, a grim-faced Lord Snowdon, and a few days later, Elizabeth came to offer comfort and condolences to the bereaved. She came not so much as queen, more as a mother. Then, the saddest day of all.
Most of my class was killed. About 5 or 6 of us survived. We didn't really register. You know, it was a dream until the reality when the children were being buried, when you saw the hearses and all that.
Today, an imposing memorial commemorates a generation of children who died at Aberfan. From those stark days of 1966, the village has now largely returned to normal. The sound of Welsh music has come back. the Ennisoan Male Voice Choir, formed by the rescue workers themselves. On the site of the rescue operation, there now stands a community center, which offers many recreational facilities, including this swimming pool. It was built with gifts of money sent to Aberfan from Britain and around the world, gifts amounting to nearly $6 million. There's a new school complex, too, far away from the old one. Here, today's carefree young children play in complete safety, quite unaware of the tragedy that struck the village before many of them were born. They don't know what coal tips are. To them, they hardly exist. But the mothers of some of these children were the mothers of those who died. This is a replacement school, opened with due ceremony by the Prime Minister 3 years after the old school was destroyed. These are the new children of Aberfan, and they can look to the future with certainty. Time has been a healer, and family life goes on. Their new open-plan school with its modern teaching methods bear testimony to that hope. The physical reminders have long been removed, and that has helped. But the emotional scars of what happened to Aberfan will inevitably remain for years to come. The adjustment is well underway, but it is not easy. Memories linger on.
Then he remembered that he had forgotten to empty.
Nothing remains of the old school now. In its place stands a peaceful rose garden, but few villagers go there.
Having sent 3 children to school that morning, it was very difficult later on to come to terms with the fact that only one came home, you know. You have books printed of how to behave, say, before birth. You have books printed of how to live. But no one prints a book on telling you how to behave after death has occurred in your family, or how to behave after you've lost someone very dear and close to you. There isn't anything. There's nothing at all, printed in this way. Human beings then are not in any way prepared for death. And while, yes, you expect it in the old people, and you say, well, it's a normal thing to happen, and everything carries on. But with someone so young, you're not prepared for it, you see. And while, yes, you can get over the death, I think that the shock of it and having to live without any communication at all, and you have to live with the silence of that.
Aberfan, like all Welsh communities, has a strong religious tradition. There are 9 chapels, gospel halls, and churches in the village. Religious belief has helped. But will recovery ever be complete? Kenneth Hayes, the Baptist minister, assesses.
You can think of recovery in 2 ways, I think. You can think of surface recovery, which I would say is just about complete. But inevitably, those of us who are here, and we don't like to talk about it a lot to know there are many, but I think for all, you can say they'll never recover. They are affected in some way or other. But the faith of those who are Christians here is very stable. And in fact, I can now say that no one of my own particular congregation, as far as I know of other congregations, have left the church because of this, and I think that will indicate the stability.
I seen things that morning that makes you think there's something beyond this. There's something beyond this. And it's a funny thing, I've looked at this and Not once, not twice. Good many times. Cloud shape in the sky it was. And it was there. Why I was looking at it, I don't know. But I knew what it was. As it seemed fantastic to say it, but it seemed like a cloud in the shape of Jesus Christ's face looking down. Which I never told anybody.
Was the Aberfan disaster inevitable?
It was inevitable. It was inevitable. And the tragedy was that while all the warning signs were here, but like all other disasters, the warning signs were not appreciated by those involved.
Those involved quickly learned. After Aberfan, 30 tips were found to be unstable, and more have been removed. Stringent regulations now govern the remaining tips. Tests like this one for subterranean water, the cause of the Aberfan disaster, are frequent.
Well, now we have so many inspections which are necessary as a result of that disaster. We now have a weekly inspection which has to be done by the tip foreman, a monthly inspection which has to be done by the colliery unit mechanical engineer, a 3-monthly inspection by the colliery manager, a 6-monthly inspection by the civil engineering department, and then also a 2-yearly inspection by the chartered civil engineer. And also, as well as a 2-yearly inspection, an additional report has to be prepared every 2 years to give an opinion on the security of the tip. It is as a result of the disaster these various measures were introduced to ensure that this sort of disaster could never occur again.
The last of the coal waste tips are now being removed from the villages of Wales. It has taken a long time, and it has taken the lives of 144 people before it happened. Families have been rebuilt, but not replaced.
If anyone is going to take my word, if you've lost a child, have another one, I couldn't give them that advice, really, because what they would be looking for possibly was a replica of what they lost. And this doesn't happen, because the 2 boys that we've had are entirely different people to what they were. So you can't say, you know, to anyone, you can't give advice to anyone in that respect. These are 2 entirely different people. They're entirely different personalities. And if one would want to console oneself in getting other children, well, they must be prepared, of course, not to have them to imitate the ones that they've lost.
But in the early years, it was quite awful, really, growing up with very, very few friends around of my immediate age. But you go away and then you meet newer friends and something, they take their place.
Aberfan today, the village that paid an unforgivably heavy price to learn a lesson. But because of what happened there, coal mining communities not only in Wales, but throughout the world, can go about their lives with peace of mind. More than a decade has passed since the Aberfan disaster. Life goes on here because it has to. There are few reminders of that dreadful day in 1966. A plaque here, a memorial there. Bereaved families have been paid compensation for whatever that means. And a new generation of children are growing up here. Laughter has returned to Aberfan, and the sound is precious. The disaster that was simply known as Aberfan will never happen again. And you know, it shouldn't have happened in the first place.